Here's a question I get all the time. Okay, I'm planting a church, or I'm pastoring a church. How do I get the DNA of a heart for the nations in my church? How would you answer that question?
That's good. And even the way you phrase it, the first thing that came to my mind is, okay, it's got to be in the DNA. I think, first of all, pastorally, and I'm going to share this later tonight, but George Pentecost said 100 years ago that to the pastor belongs the privilege and responsibility of the missionary problem. So I've got a conviction that a local church is the sending base, and this issue, there's 6,500 plus people groups that are unreached with the gospel. This is not primarily a problem for the mission organizations to solve. Like, this is a problem for the local church to rise up and say, we want to be a part of the spread of the gospel. So for a pastor to really have that conviction that says, okay, wherever I pastor, I want to pastor with the end in mind. So I want to make disciples absolutely right there in my community. There's a unique responsibility that you have in Austin, that I have in Birmingham, that any pastor is going to have in the community where he is. But it's always to the end. We make disciples there so that we can make disciples in all nations. And so to pastorally, to be praying for the nations, to be giving to the nations, our hearts follow our money. Like, how are we prioritizing that, even in just our own personal giving? Studying, being aware of what God's doing among the nations, and then going to the nations. I know one of the most influential things in my own life has been involvement overseas in short-term mission done right, which that's a whole other conversation, but I really believe short-term mission can be done right. And for a pastor to, 2 or 3 times a year, I'm overseas.
Right.
And I'm not saying every pastor has to do that, but that being
when
with brothers and sisters around the world, or being with people who've never heard the name of Jesus, just transforms perspective on ministry for me in Birmingham, Alabama. And if I'm not careful, I'll start to believe the world looks like Birmingham, Alabama.
Yeah.
When it doesn't.
It does.
And so that really has to make its way deep in the pastor's heart. And then there's so much. Then I would encourage that pastor, even in his preaching, to tie what we look at in the Word with the overall gospel story. That's central. But part of the overall gospel story is God is making a great name for himself among the nations through the supremacy of Christ. And so to tie, like when I'm preaching on marriage, I want to show people why marriage is good, not just so we can have good husbands and good wives and even gospel-centered husbands and wives, but marriage is good because this is the display of the gospel to the nations. Right. And if we are falling when it comes to marriage, we're giving the world a skewed portrayal of the gospel, and it's hindering our advancement of the gospel. So to really look for opportunities, not just to preach a mission sermon here or there. There's times for that where we do what you did with calling people out. There's times for that for sure, but then also to let that DNA really infuse a week by week preaching through the Word, I think is really huge. And then to help give people opportunities. So let me ask you along those lines, like when you got these 500 people informational meeting, what do you begin to do to help them think through? What have you guys done to help them think through, all right, how does this look like in action? Because I'm guessing a lot of guys don't know where to start with that.
It's a long, long process, but one of the main things we do, first thing out of blocks is we do assessment. We assess character, we assess calling, and then we, at that point, begin to, when we realize, okay, this person, we do feel like they're called, we feel like they're ready, feel like they get the gospel, then we surround them with a team of advocates from our church. Typically, these are our small group ministry, our missional community group ministry will adopt one of our 100 people goers. Right. They'll come around them, they'll love on them, pray for them, help raise money for them, and then so it's just a team effort. But what that's done is that has gotten our entire church involved with this passion for the nations, and so it's contagious.
That's good. So everybody's playing a part. I think that's key, because then, like when we send out a team to the Arundo people in North Africa. Like what we said to our church is, all right, this is not just this team going. This is us as a church saying this is an unreached people group, and we want to take responsibility, obviously under the sovereignty of God. It's not that we can do this on our own by any means, but He's entrusted this commission to us. So we want to take responsibility for praying for, giving to, and sending some from us to be among that unreached people group, and then going to them short term and doing
because there's people in the church that are called to missions, but they're not called to go.
Right.
They're called to pay for it.
Right.
They're called to pray for it.
Yeah.
And I think that was eye-opening to a lot of folks in our church when we're constantly preaching this Great Commission stuff, go to the nations, but a guy's like, I truly believe I'm called to stay here. How do I get involved?
Yeah.
And that advocacy team was huge for us.
Well, and that's huge. Like, and part of it is a mindset, I think.
Or do you feel like everybody's called to go?
I think more people are called to go than are going.
Yeah.
I think most people have really. I think if we were all really putting a blank check on the table and saying no strings attached, do you want me to go? I think with 6,500 unreached people groups, a lot more of us should be. And I think there's all kinds of avenues through which we haven't really seriously thought about going. Like, yes, there's traditional missionary routes, but there's also so many vocation as mission routes that I think we need to bust the lid on.
It takes guts to do that. To have not what I mean by that is, as a pastor, it takes guts to stand up and say, you need to go.
Yeah.
Because I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
My doctor, the guy that's my doctor at the Austin Stone, the guy that I have his cell number.
Right.
I'm like, hey, bro, my kid's sick. It's 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Write me a prescription. I preach, and he comes up to me and he's like, man, I'm going.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't want you to go.
No doubt. It is
I want to be
tough.
able to call you.
You're right, on so many levels. And it's Acts 13.
And I want him to tithe to my church. You know what I'm saying? And so there's
bro,
that part of you.
I've
I
never
know.
thought that at all.
But there's that part of me that you want him to go, but then you want him to stay. And so,
and that's why, and we've said Acts 13, like, all right, Paul and Barnabas, the Spirit sets apart to go out. I mean, if you want 2 guys to stay at your church, it's Paul and Barnabas. You don't want to lose these guys.
Right.
But. And that's what from the beginning we've taught. We don't want to be afraid to send our best out. Like, what's most important here is not our seating capacity, our sending capacity. So we got to send the best. And it's not easy. And it's even pastorally heart-wrenching. You know, when you see these brothers and sisters that you've walked alongside, that you love and you care for. It's the picture in Acts 20 when Paul is just weeping with these Ephesian elders, and it's I love these people, and we are sending them to a really dangerous place in some situations, and there's a heaviness there that's good, that's biblical, but you're right, it's not easy.
It's good for the pastor's heart too, and I firmly believe this, that as a pastor, you ought to be doing things consistently in your ministry that nobody gets the credit for but Jesus.
Absolutely.
And when somebody comes to Christ in an unreached people group, you don't get to add them on your attendance rolls. When somebody comes to Christ in an unreached people group, they don't tithe to your church. When somebody comes to Christ in an unreached people group, they don't Twitter about how good your sermon was that Sunday. And the only person that gets the credit for people coming to Jesus in unreached people groups is Jesus.
That's right.
And that's so good for our hearts as American pastors to be a part of a ministry that you cannot take credit for.
Yeah,
so,
and especially along the lines of, just to take that a step further too, because I agree wholeheartedly, then especially when we're involved overseas, like, it's not like Church at Brook Hills is going and we're wearing Brook Hills t-shirts or setting up. I mean, we are, where there are Christians, where there are churches, we want to come alongside and just build those up, and that success to be through everything that's going on through those local churches and those communities. And so it's just, it's hopefully a dying to self that's in that, that's really, really healthy.